Jane stared in disbelief as the construction crew tore down her beloved garden fountain. "This can't be happening," she whispered, clutching the cease and desist letter from the HOA. For years, the fountain had been the centerpiece of her lovingly tended yard, until the new neighbors on the block complained. Now, with her life's work destroyed, Jane vowed to uncover the truth and fight back, no matter the cost. Little did she know, her fountain was about to make history. The rumble of the excavator's engine shattered the peaceful morning quiet. Jane rushed outside, her heart pounding, as the crane's massive metal claw grabbed hold of the fountain's intricate stonework. "Stop! You can't do this," she cried, but the work crew paid her no mind. With a sickening crunch, the fountain crumpled under the machine's relentless force, spraying water in all directions. Jane collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. This fountain had been her pride and joy for over 2 decades, a testament to her passion for gardening and her commitment to creating a welcoming oasis on the block. And now, it was gone. Just then, a familiar black SUV pulled up. Jane's stomach twisted as her neighbor Meredith, the HOA president, emerged with a smug expression. "I told you this would happen, Jane," Meredith said, striding over. "The fountain was in clear violation of our community guidelines. You left me no choice but to take action. But it's been here for years. How can you just destroy it like this?" Jane pleaded, her voice laced with anguish. Meredith shrugged. "Rules are rules. You should have complied when we first sent the warning. Now, clean this mess up and make sure you don't put anything else unsightly in your yard." With that, Meredith turned on her heel and headed back to her car, leaving Jane in a haze of devastation and fury. As the last fragments of the fountain were carted away, Jane stared at the empty space, her mind racing. This couldn't be the end. She had poured her heart and soul into that garden, and she refused to let Meredith and the HOA take it from her without a fight. Determined, Jane headed inside to her study, pulling out a thick binder filled with old newspaper clippings and historic documents. If the HOA thought they could bulldoze her life's work, they had another thing coming. Jane spent the next several hours poring over the documents in her binder, her brow furrowed in concentration. As she meticulously reviewed each faded newspaper clipping and handwritten note, a plan began to take shape. The foundation of her beloved fountain dated back decades, long before the current HOA had been established. In fact, the original design had been commissioned by the city as part of a community revitalization project. Jane's eyes widened as she realized the implications. Her fountain might actually be considered a historic landmark. Filled with newfound determination, Jane grabbed her car keys and headed straight to City Hall. She had to act fast before the HOA could cover their tracks. The municipal archivist listened intently as Jane laid out her case, producing the stack of evidence she had compiled. After carefully reviewing the documents, the archivist's expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment. "You know, I think you might be onto something here," the archivist said, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "This fountain does appear to predate the HOA's establishment. If the city was indeed involved in the original design and installation, then it very well may qualify for historic landmark status." Jane felt a surge of hope course through her. "So what do we need to do to get it officially designated?" she asked eagerly. The archivist explained the process: a formal application, a review by the Historic Preservation Committee, and a public hearing. It would take time, but if the evidence held up, the fountain could be protected from further destruction. "I'll get the paperwork started right away," the archivist assured her. "In the meantime, I'd advise you to keep a close eye on that fountain. The HOA may try to move quickly to remove it before the designation can go through." Jane thanked the archivist profusely and hurried back home, her mind racing. As she pulled into her driveway, she was relieved to see the empty space where the fountain had stood. At least for now, it was safe. But she knew the battle was far from over. Settling in at her desk, Jane began drafting the historic landmark application, determined to save her beloved creation from the HOA's wrecking ball. This was personal now, and she wasn't going down without a fight. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity for Jane. She spent every spare moment gathering more evidence, meticulously documenting the fountain's history and its significance to the community. The Historic Preservation Committee had agreed to review her application, but she knew the HOA would pull out all the stops to try and block the landmark designation. One evening, as Jane was finalizing the application, her doorbell rang. Glancing out the window, she felt her heart sink. It was Meredith, the HOA president, along with 2 other board members. Taking a deep breath, Jane opened the door. "Good evening, Jane," Meredith said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "We've noticed the fountain hasn't been removed yet. I trust you're planning to comply with our order." Jane stood her ground. "Actually, Meredith, I've submitted an application to have the fountain designated as a historic landmark. The city is reviewing the paperwork as we speak." Meredith's eyes narrowed. "Historic landmark? Nonsense. That fountain is an eyesore that violates our community guidelines. You have no right to keep it." "I have every right," Jane retorted. "The city was involved in the original installation, and the fountain predates the HOA. It's a part of this neighborhood's history, and I won't let you destroy it." The 2 HOA board members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Meredith, however, refused to back down. "We'll see about that," she spat. "You have 72 hours to remove that fountain, or we'll do it for you, and bill you for the cost." With that, Meredith turned on her heel and stormed back to her car, the other board members hurrying to keep up. Jane watched them go, her hands trembling with a mix of fear and determination. She knew Meredith would stop at nothing to get her way, but Jane was equally resolute. This fountain was more than just a garden feature. It was a piece of the community's history, and she would fight tooth and nail to protect it. Closing the door, Jane returned to her desk, her eyes scanning the application one last time. She had to make sure everything was airtight. The Historic Preservation Committee was scheduled to review her case in just 2 days, and she couldn't afford any mistakes. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the empty space where the fountain had stood, Jane steeled herself for the battle ahead. This was more than just a fight over a piece of landscaping. It was a fight for the very soul of her neighborhood, and she was determined to win. The day of the Historic Preservation Committee meeting dawned bright and clear, but Jane's stomach was in knots. She had poured her heart and soul into the application, meticulously documenting every detail, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Meredith and the HOA had something sinister up their sleeves. As Jane pulled into the municipal parking lot, she noticed Meredith's black SUV already waiting. Steeling herself, Jane made her way into the building, clutching her folder of evidence. The hearing room was filled with familiar faces, not just members of the Historic Preservation Committee, but also several of her neighbors, both supporters and opponents of the fountain. Jane scanned the crowd, catching Meredith's eye. The HOA president offered a sardonic smile, making Jane's skin crawl. When the hearing commenced, Jane presented her case with confidence, laying out the fountain's history and its significance to the community. The committee members listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Jane could feel the tension in the room as Meredith and the HOA board members fidgeted uncomfortably. Just as Jane was finishing her presentation, the door burst open and a well-dressed man strode in, carrying a thick stack of documents. "Excuse me, but I have new information that I believe is relevant to this case," the man announced, drawing all eyes to him. The committee chairperson frowned. "And who might you be, sir?" "My name is Robert Chambers, and I'm the city's historical preservation officer," the man replied. "I've been reviewing the documentation provided by Ms. Wilkins, and I'm afraid there are some discrepancies that need to be addressed." Jane felt her heart sink as Meredith's lips curled into a triumphant smile. This couldn't be happening. Chambers began laying out his case, citing obscure zoning regulations and community guidelines that he claimed the fountain violated. Jane listened in dismay as the committee members grew increasingly skeptical of her application. Just when all seemed lost, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "Excuse me, but I believe there's been a mistake." All eyes turned to see an elderly woman standing, her wrinkled face set with determination. "I was there when that fountain was installed," she said, her voice quavering with emotion. "It was a gift to our community, paid for by the city and designed by a renowned local artist. It's been the heart of our neighborhood for decades." The committee members exchanged glances, visibly intrigued. Jane felt a glimmer of hope ignite within her. The elderly woman's impassioned statement had the committee members leaning forward in their seats, their expressions shifting from skepticism to rapt attention. Jane held her breath, praying this unexpected testimony might turn the tide in her favor. "Ma'am, can you tell us more about the fountain's history?" the committee chairperson asked. The woman nodded, her eyes shining with memories. "I've lived on this street my entire life. Back in the 1960s, the city decided to revitalize our neighborhood and commissioned a beautiful fountain design as the centerpiece. We had fundraisers, block parties, the whole community came together to make it happen." She paused, a wistful smile crossing her face. "That fountain was more than just a pretty garden feature. It was a symbol of our neighborhood's resilience and pride. We watched it being built, stone by stone, and when it was finally unveiled, it was like a dream come true." The committee members murmured in agreement, glancing at each other with newfound interest. Even Meredith and the HOA representatives seemed unsettled, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "And you say this predates the establishment of the HOA?" the chairperson pressed. "Oh, yes, by at least a decade," the woman replied emphatically. "This neighborhood was thriving long before those newcomers tried to take control." Jane felt a surge of gratitude towards the elderly woman, who had clearly been a longtime resident and cherished the fountain as much as she did. With this eyewitness testimony, the committee's skepticism seemed to be melting away. Chambers, the city's historical preservation officer, cleared his throat nervously. "Well, I'll certainly need to reevaluate the documentation. There may have been some oversights on my part." The chairperson nodded slowly. "I think that would be wise, Mr. Chambers. This certainly casts the situation in a different light." Meredith's face had turned an interesting shade of puce, and Jane couldn't suppress a small, triumphant smile. The HOA's attempt to bulldoze her beloved fountain had backfired spectacularly. As the meeting adjourned, the elderly woman approached Jane, her weathered hand reaching out to give hers a gentle squeeze. "Don't you worry, dear," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "That fountain is going to be just fine. This neighborhood has fought too hard to let it go without a fight." Jane felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes as she smiled back at the woman. With this unexpected ally on her side, she knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. In the days following the Historic Preservation Committee hearing, Jane felt a renewed sense of optimism. The unexpected testimony from the elderly resident had clearly cast doubt on the HOA's allegations, and Chambers, the city's historical preservation officer, had promised to reevaluate the documentation. However, Jane knew Meredith and the HOA were not the type to give up easily. She continued to keep a vigilant eye on the empty space where her beloved fountain had stood, half expecting the HOA to send in a work crew under the cover of night to finish the job. One afternoon, as Jane was tending to her garden, the rumble of a vehicle caught her attention. Her heart sank as she recognized Meredith's black SUV pulling up to the curb. Bracing herself, Jane walked over to greet the HOA president. "Good afternoon, Meredith," Jane said, her voice carefully neutral. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Meredith's lips twisted into a thin smile. "Jane, I wanted to come by and discuss the situation with your fountain." Jane narrowed her eyes. "I thought the Historic Preservation Committee made it quite clear that the fountain has historical significance and should be protected. "Oh, I'm aware of that," Meredith replied smoothly. "But I've been doing some digging of my own, and I believe there may be a way to resolve this that benefits everyone." Jane waited, her suspicion growing with every passing second. "You see, Jane, the committee was very interested in the testimony from that old woman. They seemed to think her account held a lot of weight." Meredith paused, her gaze boring into Jane's. "But what if I told you that I have evidence that casts doubt on her credibility?" Jane felt her heart skip a beat. "What are you getting at, Meredith?" "I'm saying that if you were to withdraw your historic landmark application, I might be willing to, oh, I don't know, overlook a few minor violations in your yard. We could all move on with our lives. No fuss, no muss." Meredith's expression was a study in false benevolence. Jane stared at her, stunned. "You want me to give up the fountain, just like that? After everything you've put me through?" Meredith shrugged. "Consider it a compromise. I'm willing to be reasonable, Jane, but only if you cooperate." Jane's mind raced. She knew Meredith was playing a dangerous game, trying to undermine the testimony that had saved the fountain. But giving in to the HOA's demands would mean betraying the memory of the community that had rallied to build the fountain decades ago. Squaring her shoulders, Jane looked Meredith straight in the eye. "I'm sorry, Meredith, but the answer is no. That fountain is a part of this neighborhood's history, and I won't let you erase it. I'm going to see this through to the end." Meredith's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake, Jane. This isn't over." As the HOA president stalked back to her car, Jane knew she had just drawn a line in the sand. The battle for the fountain was about to intensify, and she was determined to emerge victorious. In the weeks that followed Meredith's confrontation, Jane braced herself for the HOA's next move. She knew the president would stop at nothing to undermine her efforts to save the fountain, and she was determined to stay one step ahead. True to her word, Meredith began escalating the pressure, filing a series of petty complaints about Jane's yard and threatening costly fines. Jane responded by meticulously documenting every interaction, preparing for a potential legal battle. Meanwhile, the Historic Preservation Committee continued to review the case, with Chambers, the city's historical preservation officer, providing updated reports. The elderly resident who had testified at the initial hearing became a key ally, offering additional information and connecting Jane with other longtime community members. As the weeks turned into months, the tension in the neighborhood palpably increased. Neighbors who had previously been indifferent to the fountain's fate now found themselves taking sides, with some rallying behind Jane and others siding with the HOA. One evening, as Jane was working late in her study, her phone suddenly rang. It was the Historic Preservation Committee chairperson, sounding uncharacteristically excited. "Jane, I have wonderful news. The committee has unanimously voted to grant your fountain historic landmark status." Jane felt a surge of elation, her heart racing. "That's incredible. What does this mean for the fountain?" "It means the HOA has no legal grounds to remove or destroy it," the chairperson explained. "The fountain is now a protected part of the community's heritage, and any attempt to tamper with it will be met with severe penalties." Jane couldn't suppress a triumphant grin. "This is amazing. Thank you so much for your hard work and dedication to preserving our neighborhood's history." "The credit is all yours, Jane," the chairperson replied. "Your perseverance and the support of the community made this possible. Enjoy this victory. You've certainly earned it." After hanging up, Jane sat back in her chair, her mind whirling. She had done it. Against all odds, she had saved her beloved fountain from the HOA's wrecking ball. It was a testament to the power of community, the importance of preserving history, and the unwavering determination of one woman who refused to back down. As Jane looked out the window at the empty space where the fountain had once stood, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. With the landmark designation in place, she knew the next step would be to oversee the fountain's restoration, ensuring it could once again become the heart and soul of the neighborhood. News of the historic landmark designation spread quickly through the neighborhood, igniting a wave of excitement and relief among Jane's allies. The elderly resident who had provided the crucial eyewitness testimony emerged as a local hero, celebrated for her unwavering commitment to preserving the community's history. However, Meredith and the HOA board were far from pleased. Jane braced herself for their inevitable retaliation, knowing they would stop at nothing to try and overturn the decision. True to form, the HOA filed an immediate appeal, challenging the legitimacy of the landmark status. The battle moved to the courtroom, with both sides presenting their arguments before a judge. Jane watched anxiously as the proceedings unfolded, her heart in her throat. She knew the HOA had deep pockets and a team of skilled lawyers, while she was just one determined individual fighting to save a piece of her neighborhood's heritage. But the evidence was overwhelming. The community's testimony, the historical documents, and the city's own involvement in the fountain's installation all painted a clear picture of its significance. Even Chambers, the city's historical preservation officer who had initially been skeptical, now stood firmly in support of Jane's case. After weeks of deliberation, the judge delivered his ruling. The fountain would remain a protected historic landmark, and any attempts by the HOA to remove or destroy it would result in severe penalties. As the news spread, Jane was flooded with messages of congratulations and gratitude from her neighbors. The elderly resident who had first come forward embraced her, tears of joy in her eyes. "I knew you could do it, dear," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This fountain is the heart of our community, and you fought for it with everything you had. We're all so proud of you." Jane felt a lump rise in her throat as she hugged the woman tightly. The battle had been long and arduous, but in the end, the power of community had prevailed. The fountain, once slated for destruction, was now a beloved historic landmark, a testament to the resilience and determination of the people who called this neighborhood home. As the restoration crew arrived to begin the process of bringing the fountain back to its former glory, Jane stood back and watched, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. This was more than just a victory for her. It was a victory for all those who had fought to preserve the soul of their community. The fountain would stand tall once again, a symbol of the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary change. And Jane knew that no matter what challenges the future might bring, her beloved creation would endure, a lasting testament to the spirit of her neighborhood.